People have asked us if we had to do the trail over, knowing what you know now, how would you do it differently?
I'm not sure I would do anything differently. I started off with a bit more warm gear than I needed, but I got rid of that pretty quickly, and conditions can change so much from year to year. I don't think I would make a judgment now whether I would want to take that gear with me or not.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I had a little extra gear than I needed, and I did end up losing quite a bit of pack weight um, in the first month or so. So I might cut down on that a bit, but you do want to be more prepared for variable weather if you start in March or April, because you never know what could happen, and the Smokies are always highly variable. So you want to be prepared for that.
So if you had a do-over, would you start off with the same pack? Or would you start off with a different pack, knowing now what you know?
Yeah, knowing now what I know, if I was somebody who is comfortable being ultralight, which I am, I would definitely.
You are now, yeah.
I would definitely end up with the pack that I have now rather than the Osprey Exos.
Yeah.
So what about food?
I think everybody overpacks with their food for their first resupply. You know, you only need to make it to Neil's Gap, which we got to on day 3. And by the time I got there on day 3, you know, I still had enough food to go for another couple of days. So obviously less food. But again, you never know quite how you're going to handle the first days of a thru hike. What about you?
Yeah, about the same. I ended up getting mostly snacks and maybe one breakfast for the next full resupply. I had enough food left over after that.
Yeah.
First few days. So I would definitely pack less food.
And what about walking direction? For your first thru hike, would you stick with northbound?
Yeah, I think I made the right decision for me going northbound and getting to meet all the people that I did. And I also was pretty happy with the way the weather turned out overall. And that we missed the black flies in the north, which we would have got into if we were going southbound. That being said, having already done a northbound thru hike, if I were to do it again now with that experience, I would try southbound just to kind of mix up the experience a little bit and see what that held for me.
Yeah. I figure there's so much hiking that you can do. Why you'd walk the Appalachian Trail northbound again, yeah, it doesn't really make sense to me.
Right, but some people do.
Yeah.
We met a couple of people who were on their, say, third or fourth northbound thru hike, sometimes in consecutive years. And they just loved the fact that there were so many people out there, like-minded people, that they could meet each year, the hostels they can stay in. They liked that experience so much that it was worth doing repetitively to them.
For them, I guess, it's a different experience because although the terrain is the same, everything else about the experience will change.
True. And many people will say it's mostly about the people rather than the hiking itself. And so I understand that.
For a thru hiker, a 0 day is where we have a day off from hiking and we walk 0 miles. Most of the time we take a 0 day in town, but some people do take 0 days in shelters or in their tent on trail. We did a really, really bad job of taking 0 days. We ended up taking a total of 15 0 days on trail, but of those, 7 were due to sickness, 2 were due to trail days, 2 for visiting DC, and 1 for visiting New York City, which meant that we only had 3 days where we actually did nothing. And 3 days out of 143 days where we sat around and did nothing wasn't really enough.
No, we definitely felt like we were very rested after those 3 0 days when we got back on trail. And if we had had more of those, we would have had more energy and would have felt better overall, maybe.
I think also that having more 0 days might have made us feel a bit more motivated, especially in the second half of the trail. So after New York City, we only had 1 0 day between New York City and the end of the trail. And that we hadn't actually been planning that 0 day at all. It was right after we came out of the presidentials, and we had been pushing harder than we should have through the whites. We originally had a finish date in mind, and then obviously that finish date didn't happen for us. And the 0, I guess, was part of that reason. But having that 0 day made us feel fantastic.
Yeah.
It was really worth it for us. I wish that we'd planned out taking better 0s. ones that would have benefited us more on trail. But also saying that, like, taking a trip to DC, taking a trip to New York City were awesome experiences. I had never been to either city before, and although they were both quite overwhelming, like, I'm really, really glad that we took those trips.
It becomes difficult once you've decided to take a day off to actually do nothing when you've been so active for the whole summer. You end up wanting to do something, even if it's walking around that town.
Yeah.
But like when we went to New York or DC, we walked at least 10 miles, probably more in some cases.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, this will be a 0 day. We're going to sleep in a hotel room and everything. But you just don't get caught up when you still walk that many miles. And a day in a city can be draining.
And walking around the city, it's walking around on pavement all day as well. So it's actually almost harder on your feet walking 10 miles in the city than 15 or 20 miles on the trail.
Oh, definitely.
Cool. Yeah, we took 15 zeros, which...
Yeah.
15 zeros.
But would you convert some of those to better zeros, or would you take more zeros?
I don't know.
I think more zeros. I wouldn't want to give... Well, we'd give up our sickness if we could, but we can't.
Okay,
So.
yeah, I guess that's the thing. Like, if we hadn't been sick, then those 7 zeros converted to better zeros would have been fantastic.
Yeah. So as it was, we probably should have just taken a couple more zeros and made them good ones.
I guess the other thing is that our 7 sickness zeros were over the course of 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, those days weren't spread out throughout the trail.
Yeah. So we had big chunks of time where it was just hiking all day, every day.
Yeah.
And breaking that up a little bit with some good, real downtime would have been helpful.
Yep.
Because a lot of people think about post-trail and they have apprehension towards post-trail.
But you were excited about post-trail.
Right.
Whereas I think a lot of people, they have something that they've left behind and they go out on trail to do it, and then they get off the trail and effectively off-trail life, nothing has changed, and they have to try and sort out all of those things that they left behind. Whereas you came to a natural conclusion pre-trail, finishing off your PhD, and then on trail made yourself a plan for post-trail. So by the time that the end of the trail came, you were excited and ready to start doing those post-trail things.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword, planning like that while you're on trail, because it's a great time to be able to do that. I mean, you have nothing to do but walking and meeting people, really. So there's a lot of leftover time to think about the plans for what's next and what you're going to do with your life. But on the other side, it makes you excited to do that and get to that point. And so it can both motivate you to finish and motivate you to not be bored, and it can also make the trail a little tedious and
things got a little bit harder for a while.
Yeah, so it's hard to say what the overall outcome of that was, but I know I didn't have any apprehension towards post-trail like some people do.
Yeah.
In some cases, people will quit their jobs and sell everything they had, and then they go on the trail, and then the question becomes, well, what do you do after the trail? And if you don't figure that out while you're walking, you're left with a bit of a void at the end of the trail. So that's something that is worth considering going into it, is to maybe have things lined up.
And I guess that's something that affected me. My first trip on Te Araroa, it was just a short break from work and I went straight back to work. But as soon as I was back at work, I didn't want to be back at work anymore. My second one, I quit my job, and I actually I was going to go back to university and do a master's and become a high school teacher. And I did the second half of Te Araroa and then the PCT, but then I got sick on the PCT. I came back, I didn't feel like I could go to my master's course, just because it was going to be very full on and a lot of work, and I was still short on energy and things like that. So I put that on hold and went back to work, and again I was in that, weird intermediate, not really wanting to be there stage. But when I went into the Appalachian Trail, I went into it knowing that I was going to get this 2-year work visa, and I was going to walk the trail and go to Canada and get a job there. And I think that going to Canada and working there is a way for me to keep adventuring while not actually adventuring, just experiencing something new. But for me as well, planning that post-trail meant that getting off the trail wasn't as scary as it could have been.
also an advantage for you going somewhere new and starting something fresh post trail with your work in particular. Some people that take a break from their job and come back to the same job notice, and I think you noticed this on one of your other trails, that nothing really develops or changes back in the real world at the pace that it did for you on trail. So you've just come back from this great adventure, and everybody else has kind of just
keep doing the same thing. Yeah.
Right, and so they can't exactly comprehend what you've just done, or at worst, they see it as you've just taken this giant vacation, whereas they had to keep working through it. And so you get a mixed bag of emotions that people have towards that if you try to go back to the same thing that you left, basically.
When you get off trail and you start interacting with people, whether it's your friends and family at home or your colleagues at work, I often found that somebody will say, oh, you've been on this big trip. Was it fun? And they expect you to say, yeah, it was great. And then that's it. Then it's on to what you did in the weekend or how your dog's doing after its surgery. And no one actually has, well, a lot of people don't actually have any real interest in this great big adventure you've been on.
And I think that was really common. And it seems to me like it's a mixture of not really understanding how big the adventure was and not knowing what exactly to ask about it, mixed with that lack of interest that you're saying.
And also, like, a lot of people aren't interested in hiking.
Yeah, right.
Although there's the other people who know nothing about hiking and then find every single aspect of your trip fascinating.
Yeah, like you carried your shelter with you and your food. And
yeah, and those people are a lot of fun to meet because you can talk to them about carrying stuff and they're just blown away. Whereas other people who, don't have that same interest, then, beyond how was it, it was good, that ends it. And that can be a little bit weird as a social interaction because you've been surrounded by the trail for such a long time. All you've thought about is the trail for potentially the last 6 months, or depending on how much planning you did, more than that.
And so we've talked about that a little bit, about coming home from the trail and having each other, both having gone through the same experience together. Even if nobody else really gets it, we have each other to talk to about that so that you can go back through memories and kind of integrate back into society together. Whereas if you came off trail and didn't have a fellow thru hiker to communicate with,
it would be so much harder. And I've been through that
right.
twice before. And being able to reminisce about the trail with somebody who gets it is a really big
huge
thing.
Advantage, I would think. Yeah.
I've had a lot of questions through YouTube comments and through Facebook. People asking me, well, am I going to walk the Continental Divide Trail now? So I've walked the PCT, the AT, the CDT, completes the Triple Crown of hiking. And I don't really have an answer to that question. I think it's probably yes. I'd like to walk the CDT at some point in time. Not in the foreseeable future. I plan on working and things like that for a while, but I would like to, at some point, finish that off.